Everyone in the town of Timberlake knew Shadow, the loyal German shepherd from the Langford family. But no one could have imagined that on that fateful afternoon, when little Ellie's terrified scream echoed through the forest, Shadow would become the only thing standing between her and the predators. Wearing human faces. Montana, early October. Fall had just arrived, casting a crisp chill in the air. The sun hung like honey, gently spilling over endless golden meadows. At the edge of the small town, the Langford farm looked like an old postcard. Gray wooden roof, a sheep barn nestled into the hills, and a towering maple shedding its fiery leaves. 9-year-old Ellie Langford sat perched on the wooden fence, legs swinging in the breeze. In her hands, a sketchbook full of childhood drawings. Smiling suns, flying sheep, and a big dog with bright eyes. Shadow. Shadow lay beside her like, well, a shadow. His sleek black and gray coat rose and fell with steady breaths. Ears perked, half-lidded eyes scanning the horizon. He missed nothing within 50 meters. "Shadow," Ellie whispered, holding up her drawing. "If I disappeared, would you come find me?" Shadow let out a low whine. His answer was clear. No translator is needed. Ellie knew. This dog had served in the military. He'd sniffed out buried bombs, trained to detect threats before humans could react. But after one final mission, a blast that killed his handler, Shadow was discharged, scarred from chest to foreleg. Since then, he'd lived on the farm. He was Ellie's silent guardian. Inside the house, Ellie's father, Daniel Langford, cooked dinner. His wife, Ellie's mom, had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. Since then, the thread holding father and daughter together has been fragile, but strong and mostly held tight by one presence: Shadow. That same afternoon, a black pickup truck pulled into the gas station at the edge of town. 3 strangers stepped out. One had a green dragon tattoo curling around his wrist. "Ask around, see if there's a kid out here kinda isolated," one of them muttered. "Easy. Last time we almost blew it." The second man smirked, scrolling through a satellite map. "Langford Place. 9-year-old girl, always has a dog. No problem, we've prepared for every scenario." They walked out. No one noticed the eyes watching them behind dark sunglasses. Retired Sheriff Maggie Cole, parked across the street, narrowing her gaze. The next morning, Ellie woke early. She pulled on her favorite green sweater, the one with the grinning fox, and slipped into her red and white striped rubber boots. Breakfast, pancakes with honey, was still warm on the table when she skipped out the door, Shadow's leash in hand, just like every other day. "Where are you off to, sweetheart?" Daniel called from the kitchen. "Shadow and I are picking wildflowers, Daddy. The purple ones Mama loved grow near the woods." Daniel nodded, his eyes softening for a brief moment. He watched her vanish down the trail toward the tree line. The forest's edge lay just a kilometer from the farmhouse. To most townsfolk, it was an idyllic spot for autumn hikes, leaves blanketing the trails, mushrooms popping beneath oaks, and wildflowers blooming like scattered confetti. But today, the wind blew colder. Something strange was in the air, something even a child could sense. Ellie crouched in the grass, carefully clipping flowers. Shadow stood nearby, alert. His eyes never stopped scanning. Then he froze. A faint metallic click. Far off, but distinct. Shadow growled. The fur along his back stood up like bristles. "What is it, Shadow?" Ellie asked, looking up. Before she finished the sentence, a figure lunged out from behind a tree. A masked man in camo sprinted straight toward her. "Shadow!" Ellie screamed. Shadow roared. He launched himself into the air like a missile, crashing into the attacker mid-leap. But before his jaws could lock down, a second man emerged behind him. A stun baton cracked against Shadow's flank. A yelp of pain. He collapsed, motionless. Ellie's mouth was covered. She was dragged away, her tiny shoes scraping leaves as her scream was swallowed by the wind. As they slammed her into the back of a gray van, Ellie's eyes locked on Shadow. Still, eyes wide, hurt, and helpless. Moments later, the van pulled away, its tires crunching over fallen leaves. All that remained was a bent maple branch and a trail of blood vanishing into the forest floor. Dusk settled in. The scent of damp earth and blood clung thick in the air. A low, ragged growl emerged from Shadow's throat as he slowly opened his eyes. Pain screamed through his left side from hip to shoulder, where the stun baton had struck. His body was heavy and dizzy, but the instinct to survive remained intact. Shadow twitched his front paw, then pushed himself up. Slowly, shakily. The rope around his legs had torn, likely in the kidnapper's rush. He lifted his nose and sniffed the air. Ellie's scent. Still there. Faint, but present. Fear. Tears. And the scent of that green sweater with the grinning fox she loved so much. Shadow raised his head. A deep growl rumbled from within. The pain faded beneath something stronger. Purpose. She was still alive, and he would find her. He limped forward, blood still trickling from his side. A few steps in, he stopped before a gnarled root. Caught in the bark, a thread of green yarn. Ellie's sweater. Shadow licked the blood from his paw. Then he ran, straight into the forest, not knowing where, only knowing. His girl was out there, and he would not stop. Deep in a ravine near the old highway, an abandoned cabin stood hidden beneath tangled trees and jagged rock. Inside, Ellie was tied to the leg of a rotting wooden bed, duct tape across her mouth. Two men, the ones who had taken her, took turns guarding the door. They whispered into radios, muttering strange slang and foreign accents. Ellie, though young, wasn't dumb. She knew this wasn't a prank. These weren't good people. But instead of panicking, she remembered her father's words. You're your mother's daughter. Smart, brave, and never forget. There's always light, even in the darkest place. Carefully, Ellie pressed the heel of her boot to the wooden floor. She scraped faint marks, arrows, pointing the way she'd come. She remembered the trails. Every time they moved her, she left a trace. A torn page from her sketchbook. A loose thread from her coat. She didn't know if Shadow was still alive, but if he was, he would come. At that very moment, Shadow was sprinting through the cold woods, crossing icy streams. Blood oozed with every step, but he didn't slow. Up ahead, a white handkerchief snagged on a bush. Shadow sniffed. Eyes lit up. Ellie, recently. He growled softly, then turned toward the rock-strewn slope that led to the gorge. The monsters had left a trail, and the hunter they hadn't accounted for was closing in. In Timberlake, dusk settled over the town with a heavy silence. Daniel Langford stood in the front yard, staring toward the forest. At his feet, a broken leash, a smear of dried blood, and Ellie's sketchbook, its cover still showing a laughing cartoon fox. "Ellie," he whispered. His hand trembled. He called the police immediately, but the on-duty officer, a young deputy named Neil, shrugged. "She's probably just lost. Kids wander off picking flowers. Nothing to panic about. My daughter doesn't go anywhere without that dog, and that," Daniel pointed at the blood, "is not nothing." A search party was assembled, but only combed a few trails before darkness fell. Only one person didn't write it off, retired Sheriff Maggie Cole. 63 years old, sharp as ever. She drove to the Langford house the moment she heard. "I saw 3 strangers at the gas station yesterday," she said. Something felt off. A child and a dog go missing? That's never just a coincidence. She picked up Ellie's sketchbook and flipped a page. Ellie had drawn herself in shadow in the woods. In the corner, a dark shape. A truck? She left a message, Maggie murmured. Daniel grabbed her arm. You believe me? She nodded. I don't just believe you, I'm going after them. Somewhere west of the forest, Shadow crept along a narrow mountain path. He paused at a snapped pine trunk. Tire tracks, and a lingering scent of chemicals. He sniffed again, tranquilizer, gas-based, same as what they'd used on military dogs in the war zone. These weren't just kidnappers, they were trained. The trail led to a long abandoned factory, burned out in the 80s, rusted and broken. But something inside was alive again. Shadow slipped through a gap in the fence, a silent shadow among shadows. Hidden cameras, gasoline, heavy footsteps, and then a whimper, software muffled. Shadow growled. This wasn't just about Ellie anymore. Inside a container hidden within the old warehouse, a faint flashlight beam flickered. 2 fold-out cots. On one, a blonde girl, maybe 7, pale and terrified. Shadow slid in through a crack in the metal. The girl saw him and didn't scream. Instead, she whispered, "You're Shadow?" He licked her hand. She smiled through tears. "Ellie told me. She said you'd come." The girl sobbed, trembling. "They took her away this morning. Said something about the border. I'm scared." Shadow bit at the ropes gently, freeing her. Footsteps pounded outside. Shadow reacted instantly. The first man opened the container, and Shadow lunged. Teeth sank into flesh. The second man pulled a gun, but Shadow rolled into the shadows. One leap, one bite. The weapon clattered to the ground. Screams echoed through the warehouse. The alarm blared. Shadow spun around, gnawed through the girl's bindings, and nudged her toward the crack in the wall. She understood. Without a word, she slipped through. Into freedom. "Thank you," she whispered one last time. And then she was gone. Shadow turned back. Ellie was still missing, and the night was far from over. Above, storm clouds swirled like a warning. The first snowstorm of the season arrived early, wind howling across Montana's barren hills. Shadow ran, fast, faster than pain. Each step sent agony through his torn leg, but Ellie's scent lingered in the freezing wind. Then, gasoline, exhaust, human sweat. An old gray truck trundled through the snow, engine wheezing. In the back, steel doors were locked tight. Inside, Ellie, eyes shut, lips blue. Her hands clutched a worn scarf, once her mother's. Meanwhile, in Timberlake's sheriff's office, Daniel slammed his fist on the desk. "The state police say they'll send someone, but when? It's been nearly 2 days." Sheriff Maggie strapped on her winter coat. Her eyes narrowed. "I don't need them. I have this." She unrolled a map, marked in red, places children vanished, odd tire tracks, unreported sightings. "We'll find her before they cross the border." Daniel grabbed his hunting rifle. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truck slowed, wheels slipping. The driver cursed. "We're not making it. Road's shot. Leave the girl. She's a liability now. That damn dog bit Jorge's arm clean through. I'm not sticking around for round 2. They hauled Ellie out. She barely moved. Tossed her into an abandoned woodshed. Threw in a threadbare blanket. "Job's done. Let's go." The truck vanished into the snow. Minutes later, Shadow arrived. He pushed through a side crack in the shed. Ellie lay still, barely breathing. Shadow curled his body around her, warming her with his heat. He licked her cheek and nudged her gently. Her eyes fluttered. "Shadow," she whispered. Then, a growl. One of them had come back. "You again?" The man sneered, drawing a knife. "Should have finished you." Shadow didn't wait. He struck. Teeth flashed. Blood splattered across white snow. A war between beast and man. Silent, brutal, savage. Far off, a howl rang through the trees. Maggie and Daniel were tracking the old GPS chip Daniel once hid in Shadow's collar. "You hear that?" Maggie said, eyes wide. "That's not just a howl, that's a signal." "It's him," Daniel whispered. "It's Shadow." Snow fell harder, smothering the path in white silence. The blizzard roared through the trees, trying to bury everything in its path. Inside the shed, only the flicker of Shadow's eyes showed life. He was soaked in blood, not all of it his own. The attacker lay motionless. A red pool spread across the frozen ground. Ellie was still unconscious. Shadow licked her cheek again, her breath weak, fading. Even with his body wrapped around hers, her temperature kept dropping. Shadow lifted his head. He'd done it before, in war zones, a final signal, a cry for help. So he howled. Not a howl of fear, but one full of will, of life, of desperate love. Somewhere beyond the trees, Maggie slammed on the brakes. "There!" she shouted. "That's Shadow. He's close." Daniel didn't wait. He jumped from the truck, a rifle in hand, sprinting through snow. The storm howled. Snow tried to blind them, but nothing could stop them now. They found the shed. Inside, Shadow collapsed beside Ellie, his breaths shallow. His body trembled with exhaustion. "Ellie!" Daniel shouted, rushing to her side. Shadow gave one final bark, then slumped, barely breathing. Daniel scooped Ellie into his arms. Maggie crouched by Shadow, eyes wide at the sight of the blood-soaked fur. "God," she whispered. "You fought for her, right down to your last breath." The next morning, the Timberlake Clinic was silent. Ellie lay in the pediatric ICU, warm under blankets. Her cheeks pinked. For the first time in days, she smiled. "Daddy, where's Shadow?" Daniel's voice caught in his throat. In the veterinary room next door, Shadow was wrapped in bandages. One leg is broken, several deep gashes. He'd lost a lot of blood. Old vet Dr. Henry stood over him. "If he makes it through tonight," he said, "he'll fight to live, that much I know." That night, Daniel got permission to move Ellie's bed beside Shadow. Father, daughter, dog. Ellie placed her small hand on Shadow's chest. At dawn, Shadow opened one eye. He saw her, alive, and let out the softest sigh, like a soldier who had completed his mission. Days passed. News spread. Ellie recovered. She drew pictures of snowy woods, brave dogs, and little girls standing tall. Shadow slowly learned to walk again. Every limp was a battle, every bark hope reborn. The people of Timberlake brought cookies, flowers, and hand-knit gifts. One note read, "Thanks to Shadow, we all believe in something good again." At month's end, the town square held a ceremony. Sheriff Maggie took the stage. Medal of Honor for Bravery, awarded to Shadow, the German shepherd who risked everything to bring Ellie Langford home. Ellie, dressed in white, walked up beside Shadow with a wreath of purple flowers. He limped, but held his head high. His eyes were clear. His presence is proud. Ellie whispered into the mic, "He's my friend, and I'll never leave him alone, because he never left me." The whole square stood and applauded. Some cried. Daniel turned to Maggie. "He's not just a dog anymore, is he?" She smiled, wiping a tear. He's a hero." 3 months later, Montana's skies were unusually blue. The Langford farm had returned to a quiet life. But something in town had changed. People looked out for one another. Children were held closer, and no one ever looked at a dog the same way again. Shadow lay in the sun, wounds healed, fur grown soft again. Around his neck, a red scarf stitched with the words, "Shadow, the Protector." Near him, Ellie tossed a stick. "Go, Shadow." And he ran, still limping but joyful. Their laughter echoed across the golden hills like wind chimes in sunlight. Daniel stood on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand. He looked older, but at peace. Maggie joined him. "That girl," she said quietly, watching Ellie play, "is braver than most grown men I've met." Daniel nodded. "Because she has someone watching over her." 1 week later, Washington, D.C. A statue stood outside the National Museum of Working Animals, bronze. A German shepherd crouched in front of a small girl, snarling into the dark. The plaque read, "To Shadow, who chose to fight. For all creatures who loved, protected, and never backed down." Ellie laid a purple flower at the base. Shadow sat beside her, calm and alert. "I think he understands all of it, Daddy," she said softly. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "I believe he does." Back on the farm, life continued, but something eternal remained in the quiet air. Every night before bed, Ellie would place her hand on Shadow's head and whisper, "If I disappear again, you'll come find me, right?" Shadow would only whine softly and nudge her hand with his nose. No one needed a translator, they both knew.